The Jim and Terry Show, still without Jim in the hot seat. So if you want to listen to Jim's dulcet tones, stay tuned. A few days from hence, he should be here for the next few broadcasts, or in the next few broadcasts. So come back if you're listening for Jim. If you want to stay tuned, because there's something interesting here without Jim present. He's on a research mission in Florida. At least that's what I like to call it. He's representing the Jim and Terry Show, gathering information from his travels, which he will present in due time. Stay tuned. Come back later if you want to catch Jim. In the meantime, Rex Murphy, Canadian icon, CBC, radio, television, National Post opinion writer, controversial to say the least. I'm offering my perspective from the Jim and Terry Show, from the seat behind the microphone, exploring my own recollections of an icon in Canadian broadcasting, Rex Murphy. I used to listen to him on CBC's Cross Country Checkup, a show that is now hosted by Ian Hanamansing out of Vancouver, CBC, a show that I also like and a broadcaster I have come to appreciate and value. In the days when I was becoming a CBC listener, back in my early 30s and onward, until I came to wonder about Rex Murphy and his, what do I call it, his embrace of things farther and farther, further and further, distance and quality to the right. And I wondered what was going on. And my icon, because he really did represent someone who I did admire. I liked his, dare I say it, his prickly conversation, the way that he was able to stir the pot. In fact, that's a title of a National Post opinion piece on Rex Murphy, who passed away just this past week, which is why we are looking at Rex Murphy, Canadian broadcast icon. And you either love him or hate him, or perhaps you're like myself, ambivalent. You loved him at one point, you loathed him at another point, and there was a journey from there, those 2 points, from one to the other. So the question is why? Why would someone like me who enjoyed his broadcast start to wonder, raise one eyebrow? Do you remember the Canadian advertisement for how do you tell things are a little out of sorts? You raise one eyebrow and say, about that. That became how I embraced Rex Murphy in the latter years of his life. He passed away at age 77, I believe. And I did a little sort of retrospective look back at Rex Murphy. But I'm going to start with what I think is a nice way of looking at it. 2 bits of pieces of broadcast archival stuff. One is current, so that is where I will start, and then I'll go back to the beginnings and then offer a wrap-up opinion. So here we go. Currently, a review by a Conservative Member of Parliament just a few days ago on Rex Murphy.
I note that you are a former Director of Communications to Mr. Harper, and you worked at the National Post, and now you've been a long-term Member of Parliament for New Brunswick Southwest. What's your connection to Mr. Murphy, please?
So I got to know Rex about 8 years ago, as he was writing more and more, and as well, Rex was often on the speaking circuit across the country. He was, I think, a draw pretty much anywhere he went. So I both had a chance to get to know Rex a little bit, but also frequently bumped into him at speaking engagements across the country.
I'm wondering, as a man who was born in Newfoundland before it became Canada, and who went to be a Rhodes Scholar and then hosted many shows on VOCM, on CBC, and then the National Post, was there a secret, do you think, to Rex's connection with Canada? Or, for someone who was born at the far side in Carbonear and then...
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's one that we should, it's worth pondering. What is it that gave Rex an insight, I think, to Canadians across this country? I've had more than one friend from Western Canada say that even though Rex was not from the West, he understood the West aspirations as if he'd been born and bred there. And that's unique given his upbringing on the other side of the country and born before Newfoundland Labrador was even part of Canada. And I think part of it, of course, comes from his own upbringing. There's no doubt that Rex understood the boom and bust of the resource economy. It certainly affected Newfoundland Labrador. I think Rex was also grateful for the opportunities that Western Canada and the resource sector offered his fellow countrymen in time of need. And Rex told me one time that it impacts you when you come across a grown man who's crying because he can't provide for his family. So Rex understood the strength of this country was intertwined with the resource sector because it gave people work, and Rex understood the importance, the dignity of work. So, and I think as well, Rex, as host of Cross Country Checkup for so many years, he listened to Canadians, something that we in this building could probably do a lot more of.
Well, there you go. A little bit of a review from a Conservative Member of Parliament, and it has some opening that I would like to explore a little bit later, which is Rex Murphy's embrace of the oil and gas sector. Apparently, there's some controversy surrounding that, and that is that he failed to disclose while he was employed by CBC that he was getting a side hustle. Is that the language of today? The side hustle under the table, unbeknownst, undeclared income, being an advocate for the oil and gas industry. And I got to remind listeners that it's a little bit ironic to me that the oil and gas sector is linked into such an icon as Rex Murphy, and seconding his brand, his name, as maybe a trusted source in the ears of a lot of aging Canadians, middle-income Canadians, grassroots Canadians, a voice for those people. But the oil and gas does not represent the common people. Oil and gas industry, you may recall Trudeau developed Petro-Canada, a Liberal government initiative to make Western resources available at reasonable prices to Eastern Canada, to all Canadians, nationalized a gas and oil production, which Brian Mulroney subsequently trashed, sold off, privatized, which is what Conservative governments do, and for which I hold them accountable as well. Oil and gas serves the West. Yes, that's true. They had their day in the sun throughout the booming economy and development of the First World War economy, post-World War II growth in our economy. Oil and gas has been part of all that. But in part of that is the mix of science, climate change science, which oil and gas have, like the researchers in the tobacco industry, hidden what they knew all the time. In the case of tobacco, the scientists in their white lab coats declaring smoking is safe. Meanwhile, they know it causes cancer. And they knew that for 40, 50 years. Meanwhile, all the time they're putting out advertisements. The Marlboro Man, the epitome of man's man, riding in his Western chaps and horses and smoking his cigarette. Or doctors in the doctor's lounge smoking before they go to surgery. Yeah, they made it all look so nice while they knew the science proved them wrong. Science versus advertising, science versus marketing. Can you buy science? Sure you can. Just pay enough money. And Rex Murphy's own side hustle. Takes him down a notch or two when you realize that he was doing this unbeknownst and undeclared while employed by CBC as a national voice. It's one thing to say that you're behind oil and gas and support them. That's your opinion. You're welcome to it as long as you can provide the evidence why it is good for all of Canada. But if you can't, and if you are taking money under the table or unbeknownst, undeclared, that's a conflict of interest. And like all politicians, you should declare your conflict and recuse yourself. Humble opinion. I was going to play a little bit more, but I'll just put the link in the bottom part of the description maybe. It was an interesting biography, a summary of CBC's cross-country checkup, The Origins of Rex Murphy. If you haven't discovered this Canadian icon, and I will say he is an icon. For myself, I was influenced by his cross-country checkup. I thought he was a good listener, which is what that Conservative MP was trying to focus on. Yes, we need to listen more and find a way forward that helps the most people, not helps a few. And so, as part of our House of Commons and our legislative process, we're looking for ways to support people, to bring people forward, to help people achieve their maximum potential as human beings, as contributors to our society, so that Canada becomes a better place. Still ranked the top place to travel to, safest place. The economy ranked in the G7, up where only behind the United States. I mean, we need to keep things in perspective. Canada's not broken. And when you fearmonger, when you create anger, it is not helpful to all of Canada. It is helpful when we listen and when we pay attention to each other and find ways that we can agree upon to move forward with legislation, with policy. And if you can find ways that Trudeau's policies, the Liberal government's policies, are getting in the way of progress, that's worth discussion. That's a policy. But if you're saying that science is somehow being interfered with by policy, that becomes of interest. Stephen Harper rolled back climate protections, climate science during his years. That's perhaps the most loathsome policies were his views of science, his diminishing of the role of science in forming policy. While in the 70s, we had policies that were talking about acid rain and what can we do about it, helping clean our waterways. Things are different with the CPC these days, and I'm wondering why. Rex Murphy, were you part of that change? Did you sell out to conspiracy theorists? Did you sell out to oil and gas? It's a mixed bag when you consider such a famous Canadian icon in broadcasting. From Newfoundland, Labrador, born before Newfoundland was even part of Canada. Can you imagine that? Rex Murphy, bit of a mixed bag, still a Canadian icon. The Jim and Terry Show, signing off. Bye-bye.